Right, at 7:56 on this Tuesday morning, it is time to welcome Daniel Harris back to the show. Daniel, how are you getting on?
All right, thanks. How's it going?
Yeah, good. So, which was a more traumatic experience for you yesterday? The Manchester United Brentford game being thrown into chaos, or Manchester United being pulled out of the bowl twice on the one Champions League draw?
Or the final episode of Succession.
Oh, well, there we go. That's clearly number one.
Yeah, it was a hard day. The Champions League draw is. I think that Paris obviously is a harder draw than Atletico. I think United are good enough to beat either of them. And there is something I guess I will miss about watching Neymar, Lionel Messi, and Kylian Mbappe running at Harry Maguire. I feel like we might have missed out on some slapstick gold there. But it was one of those things actually, because I was blogging it for The Guardian, and it felt like, when you do a live blog, I'm looking at my fingers because I'm typing, I'm looking at the screen, I'm looking at the console, and I could see that it was dodgy. And it was funny afterwards to see UEFA say, well, we had some kind of external technical services provider that made a mistake. It was just like, well, what about the people that were doing the draw that could obviously see that something had gone wrong, because I could see and I wasn't even looking properly, and so could everyone else who was watching, and then they went and blamed someone else, and because they obviously elected just to plough through and hope that nobody noticed, when obviously everyone was going to notice, but the team that got Bayern Munich decided to complain, by amazing coincidence also. What a state of affairs. Hot on the heels of that whole F1 situation also, it's like millions of people are watching, they will notice. And it's that kind of proceeding as though everyone is an idiot, which we all kind of are, but we're not idiotic in the sense that we're going to not notice everything. We're idiotic in the sense that we're humans, so obviously we're all idiots, and we're idiotic in the sense that we're absolute bitches for sport, but we're still going to notice when things aren't as they're meant to be. And that was definitely one of those situations where they tried to cover it up, but they, in the end, apologised to cover up quickly enough so that no one had to lose their jobs or anything.
There was like two great moments of potential karma that came out on social media yesterday. The first one was obviously Real Madrid kicking up a fuss about not getting the chance to play Benfica again, but also kind of under the radar was Atletico Madrid's tweet talking about the fact that they were looking for an explanation and a solution after the draw went a bit awry, because they were essentially denied the opportunity to play Manchester United. The levels of dressing room wall content that Ralph Rangnick will be able to find from that Atletico Madrid tweet.
Yeah, that's sort of a nice way of saying we really don't want to be playing Bayern Munich here.
Yeah.
But United Athletic, I felt like that aside, when I wrote this at the time, that the first draw I found extremely unexciting. That I guess the biggest tie was United Paris, but we've seen that recently. We saw it twice last season. We saw it the season before that twice as well. But that's sort of one of the things, like the balance that the modern Champions League has is you lose a lot of the specialness of drawing ties because teams play each other the whole time. But if you get two teams who are good at the same time, you get those kind of rivalries that are also nice to have. But United Paris is not a game that I think anyone particularly, I didn't feel obliged to see that. Whereas I think now the tie is a little bit more interesting. I'd much rather watch Man City play Sporting Lisbon, who I think are a much better team than Villarreal, who City were just have absolutely monstered. They might monster Sporting as well. They're good enough to do that to pretty much any team in the world almost. But I think that would be a much more interesting contest. Liverpool too good for Inter, although Inter are better now than they were a little while ago. And Zeko has actually replaced Lukaku quite nicely. So it's not a gimme. But it does seem that it'll be a little more interesting now than it was. I'm definitely more interested in watching more of the ties than I was previously.
Dan, we haven't had you on since Ranieri's taken over, since he's actually got his teeth stuck into this team over the last week, I guess. Obviously, we're not going to get any evidence of that in midweek. But had you started to see real early signs of a mini revolution at the club?
It takes time. What has happened, obviously, is they've won 2 games and they've kept 2 clean sheets. And what they're doing quite effectively is blocking up the middle of the pitch. The reservation that I have is that they're playing this 4-2-2-2, which I know Ranić likes, and I totally see why it's a good formation. That in theory, it allows you to dominate the centre and to get out wide. They haven't quite worked out the getting out wide yet. And at the moment, the system's getting the most out of Fred and McTominay, and it's getting almost the least out of Bruno and Jadon Sancho, who are probably the two most creative, best players in the team almost. Bruno's been the best player in the team for the last 3 years. So I do wonder if that will change. I mean, it will change a bit because they'll get better at playing those roles. But Sancho is someone I want to see coming from out to in, because I want him to not just threaten to go on the outside. I want him to sometimes go on the outside and put crosses in, particularly if you've got two strikers in the middle, one of whom is Ronaldo. So I'd much rather he was a little bit wider rather than relying on Dalot for the width on the right-hand side. And similarly, Bruno is someone who is used to just being able to mooch about as he pleases. And that's worked quite well because he just has an amazing talent for making goals happen, whether through passes or scoring them himself. And against Norwich, Bruno started on the right of the two and Sancho on the left, which I found totally baffling because you've then got Bruno coming inside on his left foot, and I don't really see why you would want that. And although you've got Sancho coming in on his right, he's much less likely to go on the outside. And you, as I said, you want the threat that he might do that, because one of the problems United have found over the last couple of seasons is that teams basically have been leaving Wan-Bissaka alone because they know that he's not going to do that. And Sancho enables you to stretch the pitch. But United have kind of made it narrower again, not just by inverting Sancho and Bruno, but by putting them inside at all, wherever they happen to be, because no one's going to be that terrified of Dalot and Alex Telles, who are playing pretty well. I mean, they're doing well enough to keep their places, but they're still struggling to get around the outside. And then Norwich played really well, but the way that they played, it always looked likely that United were going to need overloads on the touchlines rather than players kind of burrowing forward. So they've got some time now. I mean, I don't know if the Brighton game will go ahead, but even if it does, they've got 10 days before the game after that, which is Newcastle. And if Brighton doesn't happen, they've got 2 weeks. And that's a decent amount of time to start drilling things properly, to start working out where people want to be. But at the back of my mind, not even at the back of my mind, at the front of my mind, there's always that question of whether I think that this formation, though I think it's not a bad formation to play or for United to play, whether I think that it's the best way of getting the most out of the best players. And I still ultimately would like to see a midfield player turn up in January and then try and play 4-3-3.
There's also been this kind of sense, and this kind of comes into the conversation about January that you mentioned there. There's been a sense that Rangnick is going to be putting the foot down with regards to a couple of different scenarios. There has been an early suggestion that he's not a big fan of, say, Paul Pogba doing his rehabilitation abroad, for example. He wants his players recovering from injuries on site and he doesn't want them going anywhere. With regards then to Anthony Martial, he's taken issue with his agent speaking in public. He says, I don't communicate with agents via the media and the press. The player hasn't spoken with me or with us about it. And to be honest, what his agent says via media is not that much of interest to me. I presume this is just who Rangnick is. He's not trying to make a deliberate point, but I'd assume that's a pretty encouraging sign that you have a manager that is going to put the foot down in those regards. And to be honest with you, take a little less nonsense than Solskjaer might have stood for.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know if Solskjaer took nonsense or not, or if there was pressure put on him from above. But yeah, Rangnick's in control, and it's very clear that he's used to running football clubs, and he has certain principles. And if you don't abide by them, then you know where the door is. And that's the way it should always be, really. There are very few players. I mean, Fergie obviously persuaded Ronaldo to stay an extra season in 08-09, but he was the difference between winning the league and not winning the league. So you might push the boat out for him. But otherwise, I think that United probably wanted Pogba gone a couple of summers ago, but no one was really that interested in buying him. So you could, on the one hand, praise the way they handled him because he still got performances out of him sometimes. Enough performances that were good enough to get United into the Champions League consecutive seasons, and Pogba was a part of that. But Martial's a different one because Martial's a player you don't want to keep anyway. And I'm sure that Rangnick would be the same for more or less everyone, but Martial's a player they need to get rid of. And one of the reasons why Ole lost his job is that he wasn't ruthless enough at the end in getting rid of the players that needed to go. If he'd have shifted Bailly, Lingard, Martial, Van der Beek, then he'd have been able to buy at least one midfield player. And in the end, obviously we can say, well, he wasn't good enough, so it worked out okay that he lost his job. If he'd have got that midfield player, then the season, I think, would have looked quite different for United, and he probably would have done well enough to keep the job. And for Ranić, it's not really about that. It's about, if you don't want to play for United, then buy. And I'm sure most supporters would agree that that's good, because that's how it should be. You want people who are fully committed. In any event, Martial plays in a position where United have loads of options that aren't him. And I think part of the problem is that the club probably want to maximise the value of the players that they sell. And if everyone knows that the player wants to leave and the club want to sell them, that's much harder to do. But that only really works in practice, because in theory, then what happens is you end up with the players stuck doing nout and getting paid. And you end up without the money to reinvest in the areas of the team that you need it. So every press conference that Ranić has given since he started has shown a bloke who knows exactly what he wants and is calm, composed, and completely in control. And I mean, he nailed Anthony Martial and his agent and managed to insert the word whomever into a press conference in his second language. And you can only admire that. Whether he's good enough to take United to where they want to go, again, we don't know till we see it. And if he is going to do it, then United will be the best team that he's ever managed, because the best team that he's ever managed would not win the Premier League or the Champions League. So he's going to have to excel himself. But at the moment, he's conducting himself like someone who knows exactly what he's doing. And also, I guess, like someone who quite fancies hanging about in the job for longer than the end of the season.
Well, that's quite important, isn't it? Because if he is genuinely capable of exerting some level of control, you would have to feel like he will be involved beyond the summertime in a meaningful way, and not just as a consultant who they ring up and go, is this guy any good or not? Because if you're saying, and I think you're right, that these players need to leave, he may as well get rid of them at Christmas, because having those extra bodies stuffing up training and blocking opportunity for young players, you don't know what those young players are capable of, because you haven't given them game time, because you've had to give game time to Pogba or whoever the rest of those list of players is. So do you expect meaningful January outgoings, that actually he's going to rip the bandage off and go, right, you're all gone, take whatever you can get? Like Cavani's linked this morning with Barcelona or whoever. Like, I think Cavani might actually work in this team, but if he's going,
he would. Cavani's a good player, but he's almost never available. And so he's probably not. He's probably not a first pick either. I mean, against teams that sit back like Norwich, there's actually something to be said for playing Cavani up front with Ronaldo, because the pacing behind is almost irrelevant. And also Rashford's in horrible form at the moment, although he got better in the last half hour of that game. So Cavani, you might get rid of, but you're not getting any money for Cavani. You're just shifting the wages and you're shifting the pressure of the need to play him. But I don't think so. I wouldn't be surprised if Cavani left particularly, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he stayed. I think I wouldn't be. I think that Lingard and Martial will go either on permanent deals or on loans if they can be found. And one of the things that's noticeable is that when United needed a goal against Palace, Ranić brought on Anthony Elanga, and Ole did that a lot at the beginning. When United needed a goal in that game against Paris, in Paris, he brought on Taif Chong and Mason Greenwood. And as time progressed, he totally stopped doing anything like that. Like, Elanga was in a brilliant form in pre-season, and all he got under Ole was he got a substitute appearance at left wing back against West Ham in the League Cup. And he's someone who Ole thought was ready, because he'd been talking about him. He'd seen on the pitch that he was ready to make a contribution in pre-season, but he couldn't bring himself to leave out players who were more renowned or older or whatever. Ranić won't do that. He loves young players because he loves running, and he loves young players because they're impressionable. And in the last couple of weeks, Hannibal Mejbri has been playing brilliantly for Tunisia in the Arab Cup. And he's another one who you watch and you think, this guy's quite close to ready. And I think that when he comes back, having been playing international football, he's probably not going to be particularly keen on going back to playing in the under-23s. And he's also someone who looks like he can contribute. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a few players leave in January if United can find them places to go that they want to go to. And I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the younger players get some more football. I'm not sure Pogba will go, but I'd be surprised if Pogba stays. Although I was kind of heartened, for what it's worth, that Ranić said on Friday that he sees Pogba in his formation as someone who plays in the two in front of the back four, not in the two behind the strikers. Because in the two behind the strikers, United have players who are the future of the club. And I don't really want Pogba taking appearances away from them, because he's not here for he's not United for the long term. And by saying you're going to play in the two in front, is saying that you're going to have to play in that position, you're going to have to do some defending, you're going to have to run about, and if you don't want to do it, then you can leave. And that is the kind of message that Pogba could do with hearing, even though people congratulated Ole, and I understand why, for keeping Pogba on side and getting performances out of him. It's at a point now, because we're at that next contract point where United have to get either consistently excellent performances out of Pogba in a performance that doesn't hinder the development of the team, or they need to get rid, and preferably the latter, as far as I see it. And it's a shame, because I know that Pogba can be brilliant, but he can't be brilliant often enough, I don't think, for a team at United's level. He either needs to go into a team that's better than United and just be the bloke that produces the brilliant stuff, like he was for Juventus, or he needs to go somewhere else where he can play in a slightly more laid-back style, because it's not going to work at United for him.
No, it certainly seems that way at the moment. Daniel, great stuff this morning. Thanks a million.
See you, everyone. Have a good day.
Cheers. Daniel Harris there on the line.